Welcome to Field Notes, the monthly podcast of modern steel construction, the monthly magazine of AISC. I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger, Chief Editor of Modern Steel Construction. This month's guest is Chris Raebel, AISC's Vice President of Engineering. Chris oversees all AISC technical activities, including developing AISC's standards and technical publications, research programs, and technical assistance through the AISC Steel Solutions Center. Before joining AISC this summer, Raebel served as chair of the Department of Civil and Architectural Engineering and Construction Management at Milwaukee School of Engineering, where he was also director of the Architectural Engineering program. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I always like to start from the beginning. So, Chris, where are you from and where did you grow up?
Yeah, I'm from a southern suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Franklin, Wisconsin. I lived there for my entire childhood, and I was in Milwaukee for the majority of my life. I had a short stint at Penn State, but but I've spent most of my time in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in that area.
Okay, great. No, I love Milwaukee. It's and I like that it's pretty close and easy to get to from Chicago. Yeah. So tell me about how you got into the world of buildings. Were there any particular ones from your youth that inspired you to get into the design world?
I always liked architecture, and I, even as a younger child, everyone can say that they played with Legos when they were a kid, probably, as did I. But I don't know that was really the genesis of it. I think I just liked the concept of buildings in enclosed spaces and trying to make something functional.
Sure.
And when I got into high school, I took quite a bit of drafting classes. And at that time, because I'm old, the drafting classes were on the drafting board with a slide rule and actually using a pencil, which we don't do anymore. In fact, CAD was a brand new idea. We had one station in my high school of some old version of CAD, and we barely got to touch it. But I enjoyed the drawing part, and I took mechanical drafting and I took architectural graphics, and I liked the architectural graphics more than the mechanical. And when I started thinking about universities, I talked to my high school drafting teacher because I had great respect for him, and I asked him, what should I do? Should I go into engineering because I enjoyed math as well, or should I go into architecture, or what else should I do? And he asked me a very good question. He says, "Do you like money?" And I said, "Sure, I like money. Everybody likes money." And he said, "You're good at math. Go be an engineer. You'll make more money being an engineer." So that led me on the pathway, and that's how I kind of got into the architectural engineering world. So I was able to get the best of both worlds, shall we say?
Right. That's a very blunt question, but I mean, hey, it's a good thing he asked it, right?
He was the football coach. He was a blunt guy.
Right. Oh, there you go. Even better. Well, that's good to hear. So, when you were back, so you, we can talk a little bit about your career at MSOE, but before that, I understand you did work in the design world.
Yes.
So, can you talk a little bit about that? Were there any, projects, particularly steel, that stand out, either because of, how proud you were of them or how crazy they drove you?
So when I graduated from MSOE in 1994, I was in practice for several years before I went on for my master's degree at Penn State. And I was at a small firm in Milwaukee that did some niche work. And one of the things that they did as a small piece of their building practice was they did facade engineering and kind of weird canopy designs. And some of the things that I got involved with this one company they would design and build these, and we were the engineer of record for the design piece. And I worked on some very sort of wild for the time steel framed glass canopies that were in various areas across the US. In fact, a few of them were international. There was one that was in Connecticut that was very interesting, because at the time, this was the mid-90s, and a small firm, we didn't have the ability to do 3D modeling at the time.
Right.
So we had a computer program that had no graphical input or output. Wow. So you put in values, you got out numbers, and you had to make sure your values were right. Otherwise, you were going to get bad results. So we did the design on this computer program that had no graphics to it, which was challenging.
Sure.
And then we did, so this canopy that I was working on was curved in 3 dimensions. It was curved all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And we also created not only the shop drawings for this because they were struggling to figure out how they were going to fabricate it, but also cut patterns so they could get the right cuts on the tubes that they were using on this. It was a really interesting project, and it got me to appreciate how everything fit together on a complicated project like that.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, curving in all the all axes. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's right. That's a little bit of a wake up call. I mean, yeah, that's the cool thing about it, because I'm sure, somebody who, you said you wanted to be an architect early on, and then kind of went more into the engineering path. I mean, that's when you sort of, I'm sure that was like one of those, when it dawns on you, like, oh, yeah, no, it's not just putting, moment frames and beams and columns together. There's so much.
But I learned something interesting from the project manager from that company. And it's a quote that's always stuck with me, because he would be the person that would deal with the general contractor. So he would take the heat sometimes when something, was lagging the schedule or whatever the reason was. And his quote was, "I don't mind having a little bit of egg on my face as long as I learn something new." And I've always taken that to heart, because that was a really good quote. And it's actually the way that this project manager worked. He would ask a lot of good questions. He'd learn a lot of things. And he was willing to take a little heat if there was something that wasn't quite going right, so that he could redirect it. I really appreciated his approach.
Sure, that's a great attitude, and it's great. I mean, and it's telling that you remembered it too.
Yeah,
I mean, that's excellent to hear. Well, so let's switch gears a little bit, going from the design world into academia. So again, you were in the Department of Civil and Architectural Engineering and Construction Management at MSOE. So what prompted that switch from the design world to go into academia, and how was that transition?
Yeah, when in the early 2000s, 2002 or so, I had this interest in teaching. I had returned to MSOE a few times to judge some senior projects, presentations and whatnot, and I just enjoyed being in the atmosphere. And so I pursued some part-time teaching. So that's how it started. I taught a class once a quarter, or a few times a year, and the classes were wide and broad. Some of them were basic introductory engineering classes. Some of them were graduate classes in steel design, actually. And I found that at the time, I really enjoyed teaching and working with students and educating and getting the aha moments from them more than I liked some of the daily doldrums of practice.
Sure.
I was still in practice, but I was starting to decide on what's my next career step. And at that point, I'd finished my master's degree at Penn State, so I had a master's degree at the time. And shortly thereafter, the department chair at the time, she asked me, would you ever be interested in being a full-time faculty member? And at the time, I was still happy at where I was. And I said, well, no, I enjoy teaching on a part-time basis, but I'd like to stay in practice for the time being. About a year later, she asked me the same question. And this is now about 2005-ish or so. And some things kind of changed in my mind, in my mindset. And I thought, yeah, I think that my next direction is that I would like to go to full-time faculty. And I went through that process, and I was fortunate enough to be hired. One of the stipulations was that most faculty at universities have a doctoral degree, and I didn't.
Yeah.
So MSOE was very generous, and they said, go find a university and enroll in a doctoral program, and we will pay for it. So MSOE paid for my doctoral degree. Thank you, MSOE. But it was very useful, because I went to Marquette University.
Sure. Not far away, right?
It was about a mile away. A fantastic program, great faculty there. A smaller program. I worked. My PhD advisor was Dr. Chris Foley.
Okay.
And he was wonderful. I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from just the program in general, and it really set me up well for that point in my career. And I ended up finishing the program in 5 years, which was difficult because PhD programs are usually challenging. that set me on my way, and I was in good position for including part-time work, 20 years that I was at MSOE.
Okay, that's a great story, and I love especially that the person. Remind me, who's the person who asked you like a couple times?
It was Dr. Deborah Jackman.
Okay,
who was she was the department chair at the time when I was part-time and when I was hired.
Yeah, but I like the persistence that she had, and timing is everything. You weren't interested when she first asked, but then she knew to ask again, and you were. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's very true that sometimes your life goes by what opportunities you have at the time.
Right.
And that was an opportunity that I had at the time.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's cool to hear. So it sounded like you had a little bit of teaching experience before. I mean, so in the part-time before you became a professor, but I have to ask, what was it like teaching your first class when you were, as a professor? Was it daunting, or did that practice kind of help? Practice, maybe that's not the right word, but the previous experience.
Yeah, previous experience helped. University classroom instruction is an interesting thing because so the first class that I taught was actually a graduate level steel design class. So the students had a good understanding of engineering at that point already. The catch on it was many of those people had graduated, were in practice, were working on a master's degree part-time, not all of them, but many of them. And they had knowledge as well. So you have to train yourself to, again, have a little egg on your face if you learn something.
Right.
Is that sometimes you've got somebody who can teach you something, and sometimes they're your students. And that's a good thing. Yeah. And I think that that's something I learned in that first class, and all along, actually, because there was, all through my career, there were students that were smarter than me in a lot of different ways, and you can learn from them.
Yep.
You just need to know when to be smart enough to get out of their way.
Sure. That's a good point.
You help feed them with the knowledge you have, but they're going to go off and do great things. So make sure that you're not in their way, and you're not stopping them from the learning they want to do. And in that particular class, I remember a few of the students very, very fondly. Students are generally receptive to, they know when it's your first class, and they know you're going to make mistakes, right?
They smell blood in the water.
Yeah, most of them aren't like, I'm going to try and destroy this guy.
That's good.
Yeah. You
still control their grades after all.
Well, right. Yeah, they have a vested interest in it being a collegial interaction. But some of those people that I had in class, their titles are vice president now in whatever their company is. So they've grown to that point, and it's just fantastic to see that happen.
Right. That's a testament to good instruction. I mean, you can be proud of that. Yeah. I mean, that's great. Well, no, that's funny. Well, I always thought my mom she's a retired professor now, but my teaching was just never anything I ever looked at. But that was my big concern. Is like there was a brief moment when I thought about going and getting a PhD, and teaching small kids, especially young kids. You can tell them whatever you want. High school they start to get a little bit more cynical. But by college, my thought was, man, if I ever became a professor, what is it like? Like having a student call you out, not necessarily call you out, but like you just said, sometimes they're smarter, but I think you navigated it well by saying, you have to kind of be gracious about it, get out of their way, and just know that it's going to happen. You're going to have some people in there that are just like, and smarter than they should be at whatever, 18, 19, or in their early 20s.
When you're teaching college students, and especially graduate students, learn along with them. Mm-hmm. That's what it comes down to. Yeah, you've got a skill set, and you've learned this before, but there's always a question that comes up that you're like, I never thought of it, or I never thought of it that way. Right. And you might not have the answer. Sometimes you work through it with this very smart student that's asking the question, and it's interesting how those things come about, and you get more out of it. So if you're willing to have a little egg on your face, you're going to learn something.
Exactly. It all comes back to that quote. That's great. So in the program, I mean, it's the Department of Civil and Architectural Engineering. Yeah. And again, it's a long title in construction management. But when it comes to architectural engineering, I mean, I know we, it's kind of like, I don't want to say traditional, but it's common to think engineers and architects are so much different. I mean, I don't know if they really are, but I mean, is part of the program or part of the coursework there sort of helping those two professions translate?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. We had architects on staff at MSUE as faculty members, usually 2, sometimes 3 in the department. And they had various takes on things. I guess I found, and I'm going to kind of cast a broad brush here, that I've seen architects kind of come in 2 different flavors, and they mix, but some of them are more on the design side, and they're really very good at coming up with the creative, how the building looks, its colors, its lighting, and that sort of thing, and they're really good at that. And then you've got other architects that some seem to gravitate towards, how is it functional? I want to draw wall sections. I want to be involved with the structure. And they, like I said, they mix, but sometimes they don't. The cool part about architectural engineering is it blends those 2. So it has some aspects of all of that.
Sure.
And I had classwork in architectural design. And I had, when we were doing our senior project experiences with the students, they had to do some architectural design. It was part of our accreditation. And some students really griped about it. They're like, I'm an engineer, I don't want to do architecture. But I think after it was all said and done, they appreciated, because they got a different, it was a bit of a different mindset that they were forced to learn from.
Sure.
And so I don't think those worlds are all that different. I think they just kind of look at them differently. You know, the people that are architects, they look at how the building, its form and function, just a bit differently than the engineer does. So hopefully they are complementary as opposed to opposing views.
Right. Sure. And like, it's good. It's good to have some empathy, I suppose, between the 2 professions. Like, you know, you don't want to. You know, I've heard stories, well, and more from fabricators, but sometimes like, wow, the architect is, in this case, really making my job difficult.
Yeah, that can happen.
Right. And I would like to think that, like, and we're getting more towards a world where they want to help each other, as opposed to saying, this is how it is, you deal with it, you deal with my design, and vice versa. But
the engineer can make the fabricator's life difficult too.
This is true.
Right? And the fabricator can make, everybody can make everybody's life difficult.
You want to try to go, get away from that. Yeah, I mean, I've been on job sites too where the iron workers are like, oh, it's a really neat connection, but man, I wish they would have thought about us putting it together in the field, but it happens. So, But yeah. So, I mean, as far as teaching, I'm just continuing down that track, obviously, it's preparing for the real world, and it's not all just theory and learning how to design, but like, do you have any, I guess I would call it, you can't learn this in class that you would try to impart on students before they graduated?
So one thing that has been a constant theme from me is that many engineers, I'm casting, again, a pretty wide brush, but feel like they need to know everything at all times about whatever their specialty is. They can't have a wrong answer, or they can't ask a question. I've met a lot of students that have that feeling, and practicing engineers that have kind of the same gist of that. I've tried to impart on students that you're not going to know everything, and the person you're talking to might know the things you need to know that you don't. I have been in that position quite a bit in the fabrication world. When I talk to a fabricator, I don't pretend to know their job, and I shouldn't. But what I can do is I can kick out questions, comments, things that will hopefully bring whatever the problem is, or the design is, into a better place. And I've tried to impress upon students that that's important. Now, that also goes to something else that I've tried to impress upon students, that engineers are not supposed to be people that go into a dark room with a flickering fluorescent light running calculations for all day. Some like to do that. They don't want to talk to people. They don't want to have that interaction. Soft skills are difficult.
Right.
But if you're going to be successful in this business, you have to be able to talk to people, and you have to be able to make sure that your designs are not just seen, but they're heard. And that can only be done with a conversation. And so those are some of the things that I've tried to impress upon students. The people that are in college, they got there already. They've got some technical acumen. What they sometimes lack is how to present that and how to make it, and that's also confidence, right? I mean, you have to have a bit of confidence to discuss things, and a little bit of a confidence to discuss things you don't know much about with someone who does, and accept the fact that sometimes that conversation might be difficult, but again, you'll learn from it.
Yeah.
I don't think that there was ever anything that I said, well, you really need to know how to do this particular connection. You know, that's just it's too low resolution,
right?
You know, from an academic point of view, we should teach you how to learn in academics. Yes, you should come out with various skills and know how to do this and that, but you should be able to learn on your own. If you can do that, then that particular program is successful. Right.
And not just in school, but like throughout life and throughout your
absolutely.
profession. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Like, I think it's a very good point you make about you have to have confidence and a little bit of bravery and a little bit of a humility to ask those questions. And I think sometimes when people want to have that I know everything attitude, that's typical. From a psychological standpoint, I feel like that's that typical insecurity being masked with what looks like confidence. But it's like it's good to teach them, for them to know.
If there's any quality of a person that makes me bristle the most, it's arrogance. And because arrogance usually, arrogance is earned. And the people that earn it usually aren't arrogant.
Right.
So that's the thing, is that oftentimes the people that are the most arrogant are doing it to mask something else. And the people that are most humble are probably the people you want to listen to.
Right. Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. So, have you been, I'm curious, like at MSOE or elsewhere, were you, what sort of, is there any noteworthy steel research or, steel related research you've been involved with that you found particularly enlightening or rewarding?
Yeah. MSOE is a small undergraduate, mostly focused university with some master's programs. So they didn't have doctoral degrees. So they didn't have PhD students. And that changes the flavor of what the research might be. It was not a place that competes with a large university.
Okay.
But that directs where research might go. So I've done a fair amount of experimental research in the areas of steel connections.
Okay. Yeah.
We had some capabilities at MSOE that we could do some experimental testing, full scale experimental testing. A real fabricated product that we broke. And tried to learn something from it. My favorite projects there was a series of projects that we did, and they started in the 2009, 10, 11 era. Okay. So we were doing some robustness studies, and this was kind of linked to my doctoral studies at Marquette at the time. And I had 3 graduate students that were working with me at MSOE that were providing some tests. And they were robustness studies of some particular steel connections. And these were conducted by Adam Friedman, who's now a vice president at CSD, Structural Engineers, Matt Johnson. Matt was at MKA, and I forget where he's at right now, Matt. And Scott Thompson, who is also a vice president at CSD now. Okay. So the link on this is they were doing connection research as students. They liked it, and they went on to a place that does connection design, and they've been there ever since. So that's kind of cool. But we were doing these column compromise tests that included connections, and they were really involved. And I liked them because they had a lot of things that you wouldn't expect in a connection. And we did a series of real breaks of these things, and we did it at MSOE's laboratory. And they were very slow, monotonic type tests because we couldn't get the actuator pull that we needed on that. And then we followed that up with another series of tests that we collaborated with Marquette University.
Okay.
And that was in 2015-16, and those were conducted by Megan Hayes and Jackie Lesser. And Megan's at Grafe in Milwaukee, and Jackie is at Excel Engineering. And they did a series of pull-down tests that were similar, except they did them such that the actuators could pull much faster. So we compared the two. Those were really fun tests to do. A lot of setup. Fabrication was provided by Germantown Iron and Steel in the Milwaukee area. And so they donated all the product, which was pretty cool. But those were really interesting things. And maybe my punchline on this is that small universities can get some real good research done. It just has to be their scope and scale.
Sure.
And, so I called it applied research because I thought that this stuff was not intended to create a new formula necessarily or derive something. It was intended to show some behavior and get some knowledge out of the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So it was applied in its basis. And I've done a bunch of tests like that in steel and actually some otherwise. When I did the Steel Day presentation, I focused on a few others that were in that same vein.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's good that, like, it's, again, two small schools could kind of come together and collaborate on research like that.
Yeah. I mean, MSOE didn't have enough facility to make it happen with what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And I had graduated from Marquette. I was already gone 5 years at that point, but their lab manager he said, yeah, bring this over. Let's collaborate on it. Let's do this. A funny story on that. We were doing our tests and one of the students from MSOE had an MSOE hat on in the Marquette lab. Mm-hmm. And the dean was having a tour come through and she was asking questions. Why do you have a MSOE hat on? And we explained the collaboration. Mm-hmm. And she said, can you put on a Marquette hat? We're going to be taking some pictures. And this student said, no, I'm from MSOE. So they took the pictures. And as I remember, the discussion after the pictures were taken and the write-up of the story was collaboration, which I thought was the better story in the first place.
I think so. It's funny that the dean, I mean, I know she's got the agenda, so to speak, but it's like she kind of missed, like, you're missing an opportunity here.
Yeah. And all right. I mean, she wasn't rude about it.
Right. I know.
Like,
she was more like, hey. Right. No, I get it. That's funny. Well, okay. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about academia. So, I mean, it sounds like it was very rewarding. Yeah. So I got to ask, what made you want to leave academia and come work for us?
Yeah, it's at the time that the position was announced, I wasn't looking. I was a department head at that point. I wasn't looking, but I've said this phrase a lot to people, is that when you see a fork in the road, take it. And I thought about this position when I learned about it. I didn't apply right away.
Sure.
I thought about it for a while, and I wanted to decide where might my skills be best utilized at this point in my career. And after some thought and some discussion with my wife, discussion with other kind of trusted people that I brought into my conversation, I decided that this is a good opportunity for me at this point in time in my career, and maybe I can help.
Sure.
And it's been, I guess then the history is already made here, and right. I really appreciate that everyone at AISC and elsewhere, in various committees and across my world and my network, they've been very supportive and very happy to have me in this position. A few of them were unhappy that I left MSOE because they're like, right. Well, I'm sorry to see you go. Sure. But they were very supportive in that I was making the transition, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, good. Yeah, we're glad you're here. And yeah, I mean, that's a good point, though. I mean, like the fork in the road, life is an adventure, right? I mean, some people do the same thing, as soon as they get out of school until they retire. And that works perfectly well for some. But I mean, you've got some interesting chapters when all is said and done and you're retired or altogether, you can look back and say, I did this, and all were valuable. And
it's I've always thought about trying to figure out where I make my best impact.
Sure.
I admit from some of our conversations we've already had, I don't know everything. And, but what I do know maybe can help out. And I thought about that all the way up my career at MSOE is, how can I be most useful at this point in time? And it felt like, after some reflection, it felt like I think I've done what I need to do at MSOE, and it's time for a new challenge. It's time to see how I can help AISC.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like you said, it's time to you what can you do to help, but also, and you like you said before, life is everywhere you go, it's a learning experience, and I can learn something new here.
And I still have a tie to MSOE because they were gracious enough to allow me to be an adjunct faculty part-time.
That's nice.
And I'm particularly interested in some of those research projects that you mentioned. I'm interested in being involved in those projects with the students, of course, trying to get them to use steel and research some steel things. and so I've still got a tie there, which is good because I still enjoy the place. I like the place a lot, but it's I think that there's probably some opportunities here that maybe will be beneficial for them as well.
Sure, excellent. That's I think, and again, the adjunct, that's a nice opportunity to kind of keep involved there.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears completely and talk about martial arts.
Okay. You're not going to hit me, are you?
No, no, because I know you'd block it immediately and then throw me through the wall. Yeah, no, I had heard, especially from our newsletter, specifically from our newsletter, that you've studied martial arts for quite some time. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Sure.
What got you into it? What's the style? And I do want to ask you, what is it like when you snap a board for the first time, either with your fist or your foot?
So we didn't do much board breaking. That was that wasn't part of the thing. I do have a story about that if you'd like to hear it. But
I do.
So I started in Okinawan Shorin-ryu karate.
Okay.
When I was 12 years old, middle school.
Okay.
And the reason why is because I was 12-year-old and I got my ass kicked.
Okay.
Fair enough, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, try and figure out what the remedy to this is, and so I started taking some martial arts, and it was kind of an interesting time because this was 1984, was it? I guess there wasn't a lot of kids, if you want to call me that at that point.
Sure, you're a kid. Yeah, 12.
There wasn't a lot of kids involved in martial arts, so there were a few.
Mm-hmm.
It's evolved a lot, shall we say, through the years since then, because back then it was kind of like a dark, dingy place that you worked out in with some guys that were just rough guys, and they were some guys were fighting full contact back then and whatever, and I was working out with them at 12 years old. And it was what it was, and you learn a lot that way too. And it was, not that I was constantly just getting beaten up in class,
right?
But there was a mentality that
Sure.
we're here for a reason. We're here to learn how to defend ourselves and to effectively fight in some respects. And a lot of these people, myself included, were involved in various tournaments of different types. Some full contact, some the semi-contact, we called it, point sparring. I got involved in a lot of that throughout my time and travel around doing that. But it's one of those things that I grew an interest in and a passion for, and it's really helped me a lot in a lot of aspects of life because it's not just about fighting; it's about being resilient. It's about having a strong mental attitude when things aren't going well.
Sure.
It's being able to depend on others because you kind of form this bond with the others that are in your karate studio. And then we also learned Okinawan weaponry.
Fun.
So that was fun too. And that's something I really actually enjoyed a lot. I haven't done it formally for a few years now. Just because other life things get in the way, and I was interested in coaching my kids' baseball and softball teams and that sort of thing, and I took precedent. But the lessons that I learned along the way feed me to this day. And my instructor is still teaching. It's in Hills Corners, Wisconsin. It's a place, and it's still open and going, and it's wonderful to see that it's remained successful for all these years. Sooner or later you retire or whatever, and somebody else takes the baton. But he's still going strong. It's wonderful.
That's good to hear. Yeah, it's one of those things. My son's 12 now. I've kind of thought about getting him into it. Yeah, I think like you're saying, there's so many benefits to it. It's like the confidence, the discipline, you learn to respect it and not flaunt it, so to speak, and just the. It's something that you can do. When you can do it, you can kind of carry yourself more confidently on almost any sort of arena.
Yeah, and I have no delusions that I'm some sort of master or as I'm walking down the streets of Chicago that if not 9 people jump me at once that I could do anything about it anymore. But
that's a tall order.
Yeah, right. But it's another thing that helps to build some confidence. And if something were to happen and I needed to react, I probably still could.
Sure. That's that's nice to know, to have that. Yeah, I took Taekwondo for a little while in Hapkido, and the reason I took Hapkido was in college, and they were doing a demonstration, and it was for free, and so they're trying to recruit people to come in. And
Yeah.
I saw the throwing; it was amazing. That part was amazing. But then I saw a guy. I think he was an ex-Marine with a shaved head, super nice, gentle guy, but you could see him become incredibly intense, and he just. It was either 3 or 6. I don't want to over exaggerate, but I think it was 3 concrete plates. He just did that and snapped them all. And I'm like, sign me up.
Yeah.
Now, I never took it long enough to snap concrete plates with my head, but it was a lot of fun.
There's another, I learned lots of lessons in there,
Oh, you were going to talk about the board snapping. Did you have a story there?
So before I get to that, the one thing that my instructor said, I took this to heart as well. And this is kind of aligns with what we were talking about with education and going into practice. He always said, the easy part is to make your belt turn black. So you become a black belt. That's about a 5-year process in our system, sometimes a little shorter with others, sometimes longer. He said, the hard part is taking that belt that you received and to turn it white again. Because if you look at many people that have been doing martial arts for 40, 50 years, they've got like these strands of black on their belt, but most of it is white because it's frayed and it's the dye has gone away. And you can really tell somebody who's been around for a while because they've got this belt that's just kind of this mangly mess. And that's, so that tells you that it's the goal isn't to get to black belt. The goal is to get back to white belt, which is your whole life.
Sure.
The board breaking. So we didn't do much board breaking, but I had one scenario where we were doing a demonstration and I was the person holding the board.
Oh boy.
And another, one of our instructors who was one wonderful man, he just passed recently. But he could punch like nobody's business. He could punch really, really hard. So he was going to break this board at this demonstration. It was for Boy Scouts or something. I don't remember what it was. And however we got the boards were really, really green.
Oh, no.
Which is bad because they don't snap.
Nope.
If you look at the boards, there's some tricks to this is that you get a nice dry pine board.
Right.
And that'll pop like crazy.
Yeah.
But if you get a kind of a green board, it's not going to break very easily. So I held this thing out there and he threw a punch at this thing and he didn't break the board, which was unusual. But his knuckle prints went into the board about a 1/4 inch deep.
Wow.
And I looked at him and I saw that it didn't break. And I could see by the look on his face that that wasn't good enough. So he reared back and he hit the board again. And he went right through the board and into my chest and knocked me over.
No.
So he was like, there is no way that this board is not breaking. But I'm glad he didn't break my sternum at the same point.
Yeah. Wow.
So, those were some of the fun times.
That's good to see. That is a good story. That's great. Yeah. I've never tried it myself. I'd like to, but I've always been told, you need it to be dry for obvious reasons. Yes. Right. That's funny. Well, just a couple more questions. And so, you've spent, it sounds like other than escaping to Happy Valley for a little while for your master's, I shouldn't say escaping, but, kind of getting away from Milwaukee, you've spent basically your whole life in and around Milwaukee. Can you just tell me, or tell the listeners, what are some of the things you like most about the city or the area?
Milwaukee is a great place. And there's other places that I enjoy as well, Happy Valley being one of them. But Milwaukee's got some real assets to it. In the summer's great in Milwaukee. There's a music festival on the lakefront called Summerfest, and bringing top talent. It's changed its format a little bit, but I forget what it is. It's like 3 or 4 weekends throughout the summer now, and lots of people go to it, and they have a bunch of other festivals that happen at the same park, and they're ethnic festivals. There's a German fest, there's an Italian fest, there's Fiesta Mexicana, there's various other festivals. There's one that's actually not on the festival grounds, but in the streets of Milwaukee. It's a big block party that's Bastille Days, so the French festival.
Oh my! And
they have a miniature replica of the Eiffel Tower that they build every year in the street, which is kind of cool. There's a lot of other great places around the periphery of Milwaukee. I live in the suburbs. I live in Wauwatosa, which is a western suburb. And very walkable area, lots of great restaurants and things like that. There's up north of the city, there's a town called Cedarburg, which is like an old historic town, and there's lots to do there. So I like that. I like the fact that it does get all 4 seasons. I admit that some people don't like the 4th season, which is the snowy season, which is coming our way. But some people do, and you know, they like cross-country skiing and snowshoeing and whatever else. I kind of enjoy that. I tolerate winter. I like the other 3, so that's what keeps me around.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things I like. And you know, we're here in Chicago today. I come down here a few times a week because this is where the job is now.
Sure.
But it's an easy commute to Chicago. I take the train.
Yeah, do you take Amtrak?
I do.
Yeah,
I take the Amtrak.
I've done that a couple of times. Yeah, it's quick and it's nice. It's kind of you don't have to get in traffic, and then luckily we're based downtown, so it's not too bad once you get down here too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's if you want to get out of Milwaukee, which is a smaller town, all things considered, you want to come to the big city for a day. Great, here you are. If you want to get from Milwaukee to some place that's got nothing but cows and barns, you can get to that really easy too.
Right. Yeah, no, I love Milwaukee, and I like the both, like, Chicago and Milwaukee are lake towns, and they both have, in their own way, kind of figured out how to kind of coexist with the lake and make it really like this, that the lake experience, the way that city kind of interacts with it. Yeah, downtown Milwaukee's cool. I do need to kind of get out and about and explore a little bit more. I've been to the Third Ward and I've been to the Summerfest grounds, and it's a manageable downtown too. Yes. I went to a concert once where I'm like, oh, I better get here an hour early to look for parking. I parked like around the corner from the venue.
Right. Yes.
And unlike Chicago, I mean, this was a few years ago, but I think the parking rates were a little more reasonable up in Milwaukee.
Yes. Yeah, you can park it. Oh, well, let's say you go out to the brewery, which is not in downtown. It's out a little bit west of the city. But you can park for $12 at the brewer game, and if you park somewhere in a bigger city, you're going to be paying $40 for that same spot.
Yeah, that's true. And I do love Miller Park. Is it still Miller Park?
It's American Family Field, unfortunately.
I was going to say I figured it had changed, but I hadn't kept up. I know it's a great baseball venue. Yeah. So yeah, one more Wisconsin question. I believe you're a Packers fan, right?
Of course.
Oh no. Well,
absolutely.
I was gonna say, is it possible to live in Wisconsin and not be a Packers fan?
No, it's state law. So
that's what I thought. I figured.
No, there's some other fans, even a few of them that have the orange C on their hats that wander up north sometimes.
Yeah, we do that.
That's all right. We'll take your money.
And you'll win every time we play too.
I don't know. Recently it's been a little bit hit or miss. But things go in waves, and we've had a pretty good run with the Packers and our quarterbacks for sure. But looks like it might be a little bit of tough times coming our way.
Yeah, that was going to be my parting question. In looking into the not too distant future, what does life look like after Aaron Rodgers? Are you trying not to think about it?
Well, you never know, because several years ago we had a quarterback by the name of Brett Favre.
Heard of him?
Yeah, and the first year of Aaron Rodgers was a little bumpy, and then it turned into awesomeness.
Yep.
So we have Jordan Love, who's the current backup quarterback, second string, and we haven't gotten a good idea of what kind of talent lies there. But as you know, probably being a Bears fan, it's very difficult to get good quarterback talent. And sometimes if you miss one, it could be 20 years before you find another one, and that's tricky.
Right, and or you become a team like the Bears, who seems to kind of cycle through them. I like to think that they've done a good job with Justin Fields. I mean, I think he's not the problem. And I grew up as a Cowboys fan too, and so those are my two favorite teams. Yeah. I think the Cowboys are okay right now. I like Dak Prescott. Yeah, and I like Tony Romo.
Yep.
And I like Troy Aikman because he won 3 Super Bowls.
Well, I think that the worst thing that could happen that we were worried with Favre about, and we now have this worry with Rodgers, is that Rodgers goes to another team. And I'm hearing whisperings of Seattle. We'll see, but goes to another team and wins another Super Bowl there, because that just happened to New England, and I can't imagine those people are very excited about that.
Yeah, Peyton Manning did it at Denver.
Yeah.
Favre, when he went to the Vikings, he actually did pretty well there too.
Yeah, he went to playoffs. And,
yeah,
and I mean, because if you leave, even if you're closer to retirement, you have a few tricks up your sleeve yet. And I'm sure that Aaron Rodgers still has a few tricks up his sleeve, and hopefully we can get all of them out of his sleeve before he leaves. But we'll see what happens. It's a little bit tough right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah. On that note, thanks, Chris. This has been a really great conversation. I appreciate it. Thanks again for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. For everyone that's listening, thanks for listening. And please feel free to connect with me at any time. I'm happy to talk to everyone.
Sounds great. Thanks again, Chris.
Thanks.